If this square is the initial starting point, and your only task is to create more squares, then in a limited space as the creator, what could you possibly create? A Pac-Man, a little ghost, a string of cherries, or animate these images to form a complete game mechanism. Oh no, images alone aren't enough. We still need text to clearly explain the rules of this virtual world to the player. Let's go back to 1980, when Namco's arcade game Pac-Man took the world by storm. Alongside it came into view the font used in this game. This font wasn't originally created by Namco, but came from Atari's subsidiary Key Games in a 1976 game called Quiz Show. This classic font is known as the Atari font. Games of that era didn't need scoreboards or even the player's name, so a game might not require a complete alphabet. But for a text-dependent game like Quiz Show, a full set of fonts had to be created. The Atari font was born in the early age of computer displays, so it's far from perfect. One might even call it rough, but we can still see the careful thought designers put into it. Traditionally, writing with a parallel pen naturally thickens diagonal strokes. The Atari font tries to emulate this writing pattern. The small top and large bottom shape of the letter S was also considered by the designers. Of course, arcade fonts came in many sizes. The most common was the 8x8 monospaced font. In a limited space, was Atari's moderately thick sans serif font the only answer? Of course not. Designers also successfully made the font thinner, thicker, and even created serif styles. There were italics, handwritten fonts, quirky decorative fonts, and sci-fi fonts. These various styles of fonts blended into the distinct worlds of different games, and this was just the beginning. Next came the element that truly gave arcade fonts their soul: color. Over time, colorful pixel fonts became more prevalent, but due to arcade limitations, they could only be drawn on a very small canvas. Font colors were also strictly limited. With a limited color palette, the colors a game could display were minimal. We see many monsters in games. Simply changing color made them appear as higher-level enemies. The same goes for fonts. But sometimes designers use just two colors to create a strong visual impact. For example, in the game Legend, which tells the story of a nation in peril, the hero must bribe enemies with bags of money to change their allegiance. The font used red and blue, evoking the American flag. Besides solid colors, within the pixel space, vivid gradients can also be achieved. Changing the colors of the letters can create a new flavor, like in the game Double Axle, where blue, white, and yellow with black shadows simulate the look of a landscape, with blue skies and yellow earth reflected on metal, perfect for this monster truck racing game. Apart from the art style, color also contributed technically. We know that in such a small space, fitting the original shape of a font would create noticeable jagged edges, so designers used pixels of varying gray tones to achieve an anti-aliasing effect. This technique was ubiquitous in arcade fonts. If we observe closely, we can see many techniques to maximize limited resources. These methods were often born out of necessity. For example, if you wanted to create a bold font, but there were only so many pixels, if the strokes were too thick, they would blur together. What then? You could use an optical illusion. For example, the letter M deletes a half pixel where the strokes meet, creating the impression of diagonal strokes. Or take the letter G, which was so thick it looked like the number 6, so two half-gray colors were added to create a gap between the strokes. I've been referring to these font creators and designers, but in truth, many of these fonts weren't created by professional visual designers. Sometimes fonts were just drawn by programmers when the need arose. Many Japanese creators might not even have known Latin letters. We can see reversed J's or Z's, incorrectly sized lowercase letters, strange ligatures. These also add a certain charm, but no matter what, they became invaluable artifacts of history. The 8x8 monospaced font reached its peak in the late 1990s. It was a distant era where what you saw was not what you got. McPaint didn't appear until 1984, and Photoshop not until 1990. So back then, every game's graphics were first created on graph paper, then hand-coded pixel by pixel. Yet in this difficult format, people explored its creative possibilities to the fullest. We all know what happened next. Technology advanced rapidly. Pixel sizes grew. Proportional width fonts became mainstream. In the end, you could even use pre-made fonts in games. Today, realistic 3D games are the norm. Adding perspective and effects to text is no longer a fantasy. No one cares exactly when color pixel arcade fonts officially exited the stage of history, marked with the label of nostalgia. Our generation lived only a few decades but witnessed the rise of a culture and its eventual decline along with our fading childhood.